All right, we're recording. All right, guys, here's the deal. A lot of people are asking about pitching podcasts, being a guest on a podcast, and I want to dive into that. But I had a unique opportunity with one of my clients, a great client, WAG, Working Against Gravity, Michael and Adi Kaju. I'm joined by Crosby today. Crosby does all their marketing efforts and pitches podcasts for them. So we were going to jump on a call and talk about pitching podcasts. So I just thought I would kind of turn this into a training for everybody. So Crosby, I really appreciate it, man. What's inside WAG with Michael and Adi? I mean, you guys, between Michael Kaz and the Working Against Gravity podcast, it's like over 400 episodes, right? 450 episodes. Yeah. And I know last time I checked, it was so between the two, around 2,500 5-star ratings. So that's not shabby.
Yeah. It's been a big podcast, and it's not something we expected either. I mean, it was just started as let's get some information out there, and it's turned into a massive podcast, and it's a big part of our business now.
Yeah, and that's a really cool thing to hear, because a lot of people, when they start a podcast, they aren't sure exactly what that next level is going to look like for them. And what you just said, I probably get 70, 80, 90% of the time, which is, man, I expected this and I got this. So right. kind of speaks to how the medium is growing. So I'm going to share my screen, and let me just pull this up really quick. Let's see here. I'm going to do this. All right. So can you see my screen all right, Crosby?
Yep.
Cool.
That's perfect.
So just in the conversation about pitching podcasts, the one thing that I talk about with everybody is, look, if you want to grow your audience fast, there's just no better way than being a guest on a podcast than when you are able to. I mean, I've seen it all. I've personally tried almost everything. But I think the bigger thing is I've seen all these different industries try all these different things as far as, whether it's paid ads or organic traffic or whatever. The bottom line is, being a guest on a podcast is the single most effective way to either grow your reach, grow your audience, grow your influence. And this formula that I'm going to share today, credit Brian Harris at Growth Tools. He taught me this about 6 months ago in their program, and it just works. And I think the interesting thing about what I want to go through today is that it's good for podcasts, but it's also kind of good for a lot of different partnerships. And Crosby, you said before we jumped on that, you do a lot of different partnerships. So hopefully this can help you in that respect as well. But,
Absolutely.
For podcasts, for pitching podcasts, you might have seen out there, everybody's got their forms, their Google forms on, hey, just fill out this form and we'll contact you to be a guest. To this day, I'm fairly certain I have yet to receive a spot on a podcast because I filled out a form. And I don't recommend it. If you can fill out a form if you want, but I find that the more effective way to do it is to go through this process and actually find a contact email inside an organization. And I pitched workshops and podcast interviews to small groups, to some of the biggest podcasts out there. And the one thing I'll tell you before we dive into this is that sometimes just getting a response is a good thing. That, you want a yes. You're going to get plenty of no's in this process, but getting a response at least cracks that door open. And I think for a lot of people, if you can crack that door open, maybe they say no or they're not interested the first time. But then when you circle back around 3 months later and you're like, hey, I just want to kind of check back in. We've got a new program or that sort of thing. They know who you are. They've already sent an email to you. So again, this whole process is to get your audience and your authority growing fast. So the 4 elements of a podcast pitch that I really focus on is your anchor, your visual, your win for them, and then the ask. And this is really done in an email. And it's a very short email. So at the end of this, I will share an example of a pitch that worked really well that kind of goes through this. But I'll go through all these, anchor, image, win for them, and the ask, because this is really the order that you want to do your pitch. And the anchor is really about, it's proving that you're a real human being. And Crosby, you probably see this too for Michael and Dee's podcasts or their programs. You probably get pitched a million times by somebody who wrote a blanket pitch and then sent it to 1,000 people on a list, or paid some VA $5 an hour to go scour the internet for emails, and then they just blanket send it. And that's how most people send pitches. And it's just there's no time put into it. There's nothing. It's just, let me cast the widest net and see what comes back. And that strategy, I'm not a fan of. You'll get people in that strategy, but the quality of it is probably not going to be great. So when I talk about an anchor, it's really about just showing the person you're pitching that you care. It's showing to that person that, like, hey, in the beginning of this email, I just want to prove to you that I'm not an internet weirdo. You know, I'm a real human being. We have a real organization. We have a real podcast, whatever that is. You know, especially when you're trying to be a guest on another person's podcast, you know, you're asking them to devote whatever, 20, 30 minutes to your information and your knowledge base. Because I think both sides are going to know that, you know, a good podcast appearance can work for both sides, especially, you know, in this case for you, Crosby, you know, it's growing Michael and Dee's influence and their reach. But, you know, so the anchor is just, again, it's showing that you actually listen and care, proving that you're actually a human. And the biggest part of the anchor is that if you can tie in what you're doing to their mission, that's where I see it work 9 out of 10, 99 out of 100 times. So what I mean by that in the beginning, you know, is just do your research. You know, if you've isolated a partner or a podcast in this situation where you're like, hey, I want to get on that podcast. I can see where I have value for them. And I also see how we can, you know, that it's a win for both, but I can really, really see that it would be good for my business if I could be a guest on there. That just go in, listen to an episode or two, find moments that work, find moments if you're listening to them doing, hey, I love that interview you did with so-and-so, you know, go to their website, go to their Facebook page, just do enough research. You don't have to scour their business and that sort of thing, but, you know, sign up for their lead magnet, see what they're about, because the goal of this is, one, proving that you're not an internet weirdo, that you listen and that you care, but you want to kind of understand what is their mission. You know, so for you guys, Crosby, you know, it's fitness and nutrition. So, you know, tying into the mission of somebody that cares about it, maybe as much as Michael and Adi do, would be really, really powerful. You know, so the anchor is just, it's the first paragraph that instead of because this is what I hate. I get the blanket pitches. I'm sure you guys do. Mm-hmm. Hey, I checked out your site and it is fantastic. You know, what is that? No, you didn't.
Right.
You didn't check out my site. You know, so like specificity can be a real winner in all of this as well. Right. So again, just kind of doing that work, finding out that, you know, you're in, you listen, you care. All right. Second part of it is a visual. What I find that works is a tactical, like, visual that just says, hey, I was actually listening to your podcast, or I was on your Instagram page or your YouTube channel. These are just some screenshots of some people that I've pitched in the recent, like, month or so. And my go-to, honestly, when I'm pitching podcasts, because I want to prove to them that I'm listening to podcasts, is I just do a screenshot. Very simple. I do a screenshot of my phone when I'm listening to it. So the example pitch I'm going to give you at the end is my pitch to the Amber Lillardstrom show that I did about a month ago. And this is what I did. And what I find is that, you know, if you kind of put yourself you know, and you get a lot of pitches, Crosby. So putting yourself in that position is that when you get a pitch, the first thing you do is you kind of scroll. So when you put a visual in a pitch, it just stops the scroll and makes it creates a moment of like, hey, why is this here? And what is this? So it's a quick sort of in the moment visual that says, okay, well, there's something here. This is maybe a pitch worth looking at. So I used to not include visuals. And then, like I said, when I kind of learned this process and tweaked it for my own business, it's so simple. Like, all of these were just screenshots of whenever I was, you know, listening or watching on a phone. Other screenshots I've used before is I pitched a pretty big person in the podcast space, but they were launching a new podcast. So I pitched me, or I screenshotted my 5-star or my 5-star rating in my review for them. Just like, hey, I just checked out your new podcast. I'm not a weirdo, and here's the review I just left you, kind of thing. So again, 1 and 2 are very similar. It's just about like, look, hey, what can I do to prove to you right out of the gate that, like, I'm a real human being, and I want to be kind of taken seriously in this respect. Crosby, I know I said that I'd do Q&A at the end. Is there anything that's kind of popping in your head right now as far as questions?
No, not in terms of questions. This is good though. I mean, it's simple and to the point, and all things that I think we can practically implement. really easily.
Yeah. And that's another thing I should have said this at the beginning. This whole process is very simple. Like that's the other thing is if you pitch somebody via email and you know, you write a page and a half or something, they're never going to read it. So, you know, the goal is just, you know, keep the email short and sweet. Third part of this, and really this is kind of the big thing is that, you know, what is the win for the person that you're pitching? What is the value for them when you pitch them? You know, and what I always like to say is, what is it that you can offer their audience? And I'll show you an example at the end, but, you know, there's so many examples of like partnerships that work really, really well. And it's mostly because one partner has a void in their, you know, in their knowledge gap. So when you can offer a win for them by filling that void, you know, you guys are in fitness and nutrition. So all the verticals and shoulder industries that exist in that space, you know, that Michael and Adi can come in as a guest on a podcast and speak about working against gravity or speaking about nutrition or their experience as a married couple in the space. You know, what you're just really trying to do is isolate for them some level of value that, that maybe they have that knowledge gap in. And I always like to say, you know, you're going to put this in your pitch. You're going to put what that win for them is. But really sort of thinking about how can I provide the most value to this partner, to this podcast host. And then really sort of think about what is the value that I'm going to provide for their audience when I am a guest on that podcast. And this is sort of that secret where, you know, I do talk to a lot of people, and I'm going to mention something specifically about Michael and Adi in a second, but you know, a lot of people that I work with are just getting started. They're just, you know, they're entrepreneurs in some space that, you know, could be a very specific niche. Most people are very, very niche specific. And they're like, well, hey, you know, I don't have a big audience, so I can't really offer much. And I say, well, actually, no, you can, because generally speaking, you are so good in your niche that you can talk about it like, you know, in your sleep, basically. So thinking about like, what is that core value statement that you can just literally put in a pitch, and you'll end up putting it in a pitch, you know, time and time again, that you can offer people. I would also say though that, you know, because Michael and Adi have a good sized audience, that is also a value. You know, we'll call it for what it is, you know, over 100,000 Instagram followers, that number of episodes published. You know, I know with the WAG podcast, they don't do guests on there, but at the same time, what you would have the opportunity to do is say, look, you know, we do promote our appearances on podcasts. So that's definitely something that's a win for them. And, you know, that's going to have, and speaking specifically for you, Crosby, in this situation, you know, being able to share what those vital stats are from a social and podcast reach will definitely open up some doors for you. But I always like to say, start with the value that you're going to offer their audience first. So,
that's good.
And then finally, the last part is the ask. And I'm going to show you an example here in a second, but really what, you know, you're going in doing is you're trying to position it where it's like, hey, I want to be a guest on the podcast. You know, we want to make sure that Michael and Dee are guests on the podcast. And sometimes one of the things I used to do with pitches is I would muddy up the ask. I'd be like, hey, you know, we could do a workshop, or I could be a guest on your podcast, or I could. So what I was in essence doing is I was asking them to try to say yes or no to like 3 or 4 things in one pitch. So really, like, you know, it's getting really, really super clear on the ask, and make it easy for them to say yes or no. Because like I said at the beginning, what you really want is you want to reply. You know, you just don't want your pitch kind of living out there in sort of the darkness of the internet. You want them to say yes or no, or we'll think about it or something. And the way that I do that is when I frame my pitch and I really sort of establish the win for them, like, hey, if we come on, if we're a guest on your podcast, we can offer this value to your audience. You know, it's like, here's the value, here's what we want to offer. And I always end every pitch with, are you interested? Because that's all I want to know. We could get to the yes or the no of is it going to happen right now? But what I want to know is, did I crack the door open a little bit? So I end every pitch. I do not end with, thank you for your time. I do not end with, I really appreciate your review of this pitch, or any of that, which is how I used to end it. I just end with, are you interested? And what that does is it kind of triggers whoever's answering those emails their brain, they got to answer it.
Right.
You know, they got to say either yes or no or something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a subtle thing. But, you know, I probably at this point, if I had to pull a number, I'd probably say about 70% of the pitches that I put out there, maybe more, I get a reply. I get somebody, the door's cracked open. And the other thing that I found is I get a lot of comments on my pitches of, hey, thank you for, you know, this is the most thoughtful pitch I've ever received, or thank you for taking the time to like listen to my podcast, or that sort of thing. Even if it's a, hey, I'm not interested right now, but because you do that little legwork at the beginning, you're able to establish some rapport with them where, like I said, 2-3 months down the road, new program, new opportunity. Maybe they're not accepting guests at the time, but when the time comes, you know, you'd have the opportunity to do that. Right. So that little nuance of just leaving it there, I think is probably one of the more effective ways that that I've been able to transform my pitches and get such a high response rate. So before I get into the example I want to show you, any other thoughts or questions on this?
No, I really like that last slide there. That are you interested? I think that's the two biggest things that I find are the most challenging is what is the subject line and how do you finish it?
Yeah.
Everything else in between is like a minor detail in the grand scheme of things, because those are it's the first thing you see and the last thing you read. And so it's like trying to really just, and it could just be a total me thing where I get like really uncomfortable of like, well, what if I say the wrong thing in the subject line and it goes straight to all of those things. So those are the ones with all pitches, whether it be podcasting or looking for new influence or whatever it is. It's like those two things are the most challenging. So I really like that are you interested part. And I know you're going to show an example. Do you have some ideas on in terms of subject lines? Do you make it creative and fun? Do you make it simple? Do you make it obvious? Like what when you're helping?
You know, that's a great question. I think it varies. What I try to do is I try to find something in my research with the particular potential host or partner that stood out to me. So this is the example I'm going to give you. The subject line that I sent to Amber's team was the blessing of imperfection, a perfect podcast episode. And she had just released this episode back in March. So I was able to follow up like 2 or 3 days after release. My guess is she probably got a few like, hey, I love that episode emails to her team. But I chose in this one to just kind of title the, I use the title of that episode as far as the subject line. What I have found, crazy as it sounds, I always find one emoji in a subject line always seems to work. Be it a heart, a smiley face, thinking, it's just, it can be a little campy from time to time, but emojis and subject lines seem to get people's attention. But a lot of times what I'll do is if I say something like, I'll just kind of edit this on the fly, but what I might do is I might say like the blessing of that, and then I'll do like, partnership request or something like that. So they kind of know, and what I found is if I put like, something kind of fun and eye-catching and then / guest request or partnership request, at least what that will do is set them, the good and bad is that the good is that they know what they're getting. The bad is that they might just move it to another inbox. Mm-hmm. But, because I know I'm going to lead with an anchor, because I know I'm going to lead with something that is authentic about my experience with their business up to that point. What I also don't want is I don't want them thinking I'm just a fan. I'm just a really caring and authentic fan of their work. I want them to get to the bottom where they, see that. But human behavior is such that most people skim. So what you said a moment ago, Crosby, is correct. They're going to read the subject line, get them to open it, and then they're going to skim till they get to the bottom. You want them to see this "Are you interested?" line right there, because that will circle them back. But just to kind of use this pitch as an example, Amber's got a team, but I always put it directly to the person. And, you know, I also find that a lot of successful entrepreneurs read their emails.
Mhm.
They might read it and forward it to their, you know, to somebody on the team like you, Crosby, but at the same time, you know, they might be just sitting on the subway, scrolling through their emails and reading this. So, so my pitch was this, is that, you know, I just kind of shared with her that it's very much in line with my teaching as a podcast coach, that I teach my clients to be powerful and vulnerable. So I called, I was like, hey, that was great. This was a very, very vulnerable episode that Amber put. So I shared that, hey, I listened to it. I wished her the best because it's talking about her IVF journey. Put the visual in here, bullet points. Bullet points are never a bad thing because it's easily skimmable. So I kept going with my anchor, like, hey, in a 30-second span in the middle of your episode, you touched all of these, you know, just this was a moment that I listened for. Again, did the research, real human being. And I even say in this one, please know I'm not a weirdo. I'm a podcast coach. And, you know, and that just shows like that you are human. So,
Yeah.
you know, I'm a podcast coach. I listen to a lot of podcasts. This is maybe one of the best podcasts I've ever heard. Your courage is so admirable. I'm pointing this episode to all my clients. So that's kind of where the anchor ends. And this is sort of the win for them part. You know, in my work with building podcasts, a lot of women entrepreneurs struggle with feeling vulnerable and feel like they have nothing important to say. Now, that's probably something that would be able to tie into her mission. You know, and just listening to what I heard her say as she works with women entrepreneurs, you know, this can be a major objection to achieving their goals, both professional and personal. As a guest on the podcast, I can share on the following for your audience. So what I wanted to do is establish that win for them around value. Like, yes, I looked at who some of her previous guests were, you know, and I will come across other people that are like, hey, I want to jump on your podcast to talk about podcasts, which is a pretty hot topic right now. So I'll run into that from time to time in my own personal business. But what I want to do is say, hey, look, the value that I want to, you know, I see that your mission is to help women entrepreneurs. So what I want to do is I want to come on and I want to show these women how now they can use a podcast to use the same level of vulnerable moments like you just shared with their audience to deepen that connection, build trust, etc. So, hey, as a guest, I can share on the following: how to use vulnerable moments, how to use storytelling, 3 ways to conduct interviews. And there you go. I end it with, are you interested? And I ended up, I'm not being a guest on Amber's, but I have a really great relationship now with the person on her team that's like you. And we spent a whole day back and forth. And then I did a podcast episode on my podcast about that, sent that episode to the person on Amber's team. So for me, it is even though it wasn't a straight up yes, it was a win, because Amber's got you know, we definitely hit the same people, and it could be a good thing for you know, for ultimately, you know, as I'm looking at it from my business, you know, for the future of my business, even though it wasn't a yes on that day, but I got a reply within probably that same day. So
that's really cool, because it was less about, obviously you brought what you could bring to the team, but it was really praising them and here's how I think I can fit in. And so I think that's really cool. No, this is really good.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you said it. I mean, it's really about, you know, what can you bring? What is the value that you can bring? And look, if you've got audience that is going to be a win, that can't hurt. But I think the other thing is when people, you know, in the case of say Michael and Adi with a decent audience on social and a good podcast following, is that the pitch becomes about that and not the value. And that's and I understand why people go to that. It's like, hey, look, let me be a guest and we'll promote on all our socials and everything. But you want that person to know they're going to get, you know, Michael and Adi would be great guests on a podcast. You know, I've worked with them for 4 months, and you know, I know Michael better than Adi, but I, you know, listened to the WAG podcast. I don't know how many episodes I've listened to, but that rapport as guests on a podcast, or them individually, I think would be great. You know, but you want to express that as opposed to just the hey, we've got a bunch of followers on Instagram. let me be a guest kind of thing. So,
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, this
so
is way more in line with who we are, and
yes.
rather than the audience. I mean, the audience is just, well, we still surprise us that many people follow us, but it's fantastic. You know,
Yeah.
we're all about, let's just, how can we serve, and how can we give our people the best experience, and then let them tell their friends and whatever it might be. So
Right.
this is really good, Michael. I appreciate you taking the time to share this, and this will be very practical in what we do.
Yeah. Yeah. The only other thing I would add to all of this is, follow up is where you normally will get the reply. Don't just send one pitch. Generally, I do a cadence of like about 3 days after I send a pitch, I just hit them back with a quick, like, hey, just want to make, moving this to the top of your inbox, or just want to make sure you saw this kind of thing. And then maybe like a week later, just a quick nudge again kind of thing. But the expression, the fortune is in follow-up, is there's truth to that. So doing the some level of 2 or 3 follow-ups over the course of 2 or 3 weeks just helps show that you were serious, and that wasn't one of those blanket pitches to everybody. So, but
And in that follow-up, are you responding to the original email, so it does all contain in the same one, or do you send a separate email that says, hey, I sent you an email 3 days ago regarding this, did you see it?
Yeah. So what I normally do is I'll go back to the original email, and I'll basically forward that to the same address.
Okay.
My first follow-up, which I normally do about 3 days afterwards, my go-to line is just bumping this back to the top of your inbox, and that's it. Or and I mean, it could be that, or it could be just making sure you saw this, but it's like one line, because it's going to show up in their inbox as that one line, your signature, and then the original email. The second follow-up, I might go, hey, just to clarify, I'd love to be a guest. I can talk about A, B, and C. Not a rehash of the entire thing. And then, if I'm 2 weeks down, or 2.5 weeks in, and I still haven't heard anything, if I want to send that third follow-up, normally that follow-up, I'll cater to whoever that person was. If it's somebody I really admire, I'll be like, hey, listen, I didn't hear back from you. No problem. If you get 2 minutes, I'd love to know if there was a way that I might have improved this pitch or something like that, or is there something I could do in the future? If I'm doing that for again, I usually will do something like that for somebody that I've just developed like an incredible amount of respect for. And not to say that like some people I don't, but there are certain people that maybe they're not replying because they're just not a good organization or something. But I do try to follow up with like 3 follow-ups. And like I said, that third follow-up is generally, hey, no worries, no foul. I'll hit you back in 3 months, and maybe we'll try this again, I think.
Cool. Okay. That's perfect. Thank you.
So, awesome.